the viola part. Fantasia for Strings is a great piece. Elliot Del Borgo is the composer. He had a chance to work with my students a while back before he passed away. In fact, the video that I linked on Google Classroom is of him with my kids playing this very piece. So you can't get any truer than that source. So it would be a good idea to listen and just to get some ideas from them. This particular piece is got everything. It's got vigor, it's got sweet, gentle sections, and it ends with a bang. So it's a great way to end our concert. I want to make sure that you guys know what the bow styles should be. So it should be a very martelé stroke, very aggressive. It starts out, it says vigor, with vigor, so that means with strength. So make sure that you're giving enough bow pressure, and then that we hear the articulation of the bow moving from tip to frog and frog to tip. So beginning, I know it says open D. If you want to use your fourth finger, by all means go ahead, but I just want the strongest, most powerful sound you can get. So the open D is perfectly fine here. I would also recommend that you retake on the quarter rest just so that you have enough of an up bow and enough sound. Because if we do, you lose out on the bow. So retake, back up towards the tip. So that gives you some ideas to do with the bow. Be very careful, there's a lot of flats, B flats in this piece, so you are going to have to start doing low twos on the G string. Those are not B naturals. Anytime it's written, it's good for the whole measure, and you got to get those low twos nice and low. And then on top of that, on the D string, it's got to be low, and on the A string, it also has to be low. So just get used to doing low twos in general. Sometimes it'll be high, so be careful, be observant. If it doesn't have a flat in front of it, then on the G string, it must be high. Measure 11. Keep that martelé stroke. Now with these double stops, the most important line is the bottom line. So focus on those bottom notes. And then if you realize that the top note's just open D, then just rock your bow so it's touching both strings. So I would use an open D at this point, just so that you get used to doing the rocking. Measure, let's see, what is this, 22. Accents, decrescendo, and then piano. Still martelé, so you hear the distinction. And then emphasize that diminuendo at the very end. Mutes. So when you get to measure 31, it says mute. So you have two measures to get your mute on. These mutes are like 65 cents on Southwest Strings, and maybe a little bit more for the viola, but still probably under $1. These mutes are very effective. What it does is it changes the timbre of your instrument. So when you place your mute on, usually for these tort mutes, we just place them between the two middle strings. If you feel that your viola is extraordinarily bright, you can place it between the D string and A string. If you feel that, generally we don't need mutes for the lower end. We usually just stick it in the middle between the G string and the D string. And then what it does is it stops the bridge from vibrating. So it clamps onto the bridge, and it'll stop it from vibrating as much, and it'll actually reduce the amount of sound that's coming out of your instrument. Just be very careful when you're placing the mute on that you don't put a lot of force going forward, because this bridge is only held down by the tension of the strings. If you push really hard, you're going to force that bridge to collapse. And if it collapses during a performance or during a rehearsal, you're not going to be able to play. So be careful. Just do it with care. Make sure the mute goes on. 31 with mute, and it's more of the cantabile that the first violins are doing. So whatever they left off of the melody, you continue doing. So when I say cantabile, that means cantar, which means to sing. So make it very beautiful, a little bit more legato rather than martelé, and vibrate. Emphasize that crescendo or diminuendo. You can do that very easily by doing more on the first note using a fuller bow, and then less on the second note. So full bow, less. All right. If we get that throughout the whole orchestra, it's going to be very effective. Measure 46, pizzicato, and then it's also mute off. So make sure you release the mute, and then back to pizzicato. I think this is the first time you guys got to pizzicato. So with pizzicato, you have to make sure that you have a good bow hand. Your bow hand should be very relaxed, and then so relaxed that you can curve in the hand. Just curve in the first, or the second, third, and fourth finger, and then have the frog curve into the palm of your hand. And then stick out your index finger and your thumb, because your thumb is going to go underneath the corner of the fingerboard, and your first finger is going to pluck over the fingerboard. Try not to pluck over where you bow, because you don't want to get rosin on your first finger. And then you don't want to get any sort of sweat or grease or germs or whatever onto this area, because then that's also where you're going to bow, and then that might get onto your bow hair and turn it black, and it won't work very well. So be very careful about where you pluck. Try and make sure it's over the fingerboard, and thumb goes underneath the fingerboard. So measure 46. So with this section here, definitely don't rush your pizzicatos. Pizzicatos tend to have, they tend to speed up when you play just because they're very dry. They don't have a lot of sound in between each other. So kids tend to want to fill it in. Make sure you're counting to yourself. Think like a clock. Tick, tock, da da ti ta, ta 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 ta. Like a clock. And 1. If anything, I'd rather you guys feel it behind rather than forward at this point. And then once you get back to the arco, we get to this series of eighth notes. So this is going to take a little bit of practice. Make sure you keep your low twos nice and low, and then stretch those third fingers, stretch those fourth fingers. Try and keep fingers down as best you can. to these chords here right before 61, so that would be 59, just again concentrate on the notes that move. So avoid the open string. So here you have a D and A. So just think about the top note. So A, and then you have a lonely C, so third finger on the G string, and then B flat, A, and D, right? Now you just add in the open Ds. So D and A, C, D and B flat, D and A, G and D, right? So concentrate on one note at a time and then eventually put it together and then start speeding it up. Now when you get to this gently section, we're going to slow it down. It's going to go half the tempo. And this is where it says mezzo piano can't, period. That's an abbreviation for cantar, or actually cantabile. But cantabile is very related to the Spanish word cantar, which means to sing. So we have to make it beautiful with vibrato. So vibrate. And then there's that diminuendo again that you can do with your bow. 67. So with this part, you have to be very careful of the low ones on the D string now. So make sure your thumb doesn't move, keep it with the first finger tape, and then take that first finger back nice and low. And then that basically takes you through the rest of this piece. And then be careful, the very last note before the DC, E natural. So get it nice and high, no low ones. And then you go back to the beginning. All the way to the coda sign, which is measure 22. And then from there we jump to the coda, which is 77. Here, you have to start out very strong, and you have accents on every single note. But be aware, you have a bunch of repeated E's. So it starts out strong because you're kind of setting the tone, but at 79, that's where the first violins come in with the tune. So be careful not to overplay them. You might want to back down just a little bit. Always be aware of who has the melody, and since you have repeated notes, it's not necessarily that important. So start strong, but then back away. Now, with this whole section, you're definitely going to have to practice it. In fact, I believe it's the section that I want to hear for your audition. So you want to make sure that you know those notes very well. There's a little bit of a tricky section with those double stops right before 94. Just concentrate on the notes that come back again and again. So C natural on the G string, and then G and D back to C. So keep your hand so it hovers over the G string. And then it'll be a piece of cake, right? And then practice those eighth notes nice and slow. The slow practice is very worthwhile, and it'll only help you. When you practice fast, it tends to lead to mistakes. So be slow, be careful, make sure you get it learned as well as possible so that you stand a good chance of doing well on your auditions. So if you have any questions about this stuff, feel free to post it in the Google Classroom. Otherwise, I wish you the best of luck, and I look forward to hearing you guys in February and March.